Hi, we're back. Today, we're going to be talking about a book by the Daniel B. Greene. I'm talking about his book, Breach of Peace, a novella build-up to a full book series, but the novella is also a part of a series that only is tangentially related to the full series, but might have characters in it that are in the full I don't know what's going on there. I read a book. It was kind of short. Let's talk about it. I'll talk about this spoiler freestyle for a little bit, and then I'll throw out my warning, and then we can dive into the nitty-gritty. First, a clarification. I don't want it to seem like I'm coming for your throat, Daniel Greene. I wanted to make sure that I was reading this book as non-partial as I could be. I know there was a lot of discourse about this book on Twitter when it first came out, but I didn't want that single idea of this being propaganda to drastically poison the well for the rest of what could be a good story. I wanted to see if there was good writing besides the cop writing. I want to give this book a fair shake, and so I did, and it still wasn't great. I think it's a good intro piece for a writer who's never written anything to be published before. And oh me oh my, look who the writer of this is. Someone who has never written anything before, especially to meet all of the eyes that have been reading this. I want to give props to my guy Daniel B. Greene over here. I've published 0 books. He's published more books than me. That's an accomplishment in itself, and I think he should be really proud of putting in all of that work. But I think there's a ton of room for improvement here. I think that, you released your first book, that should be your worst book. And if this is his worst book, then I think that he's going to do fine. I think he's going to be a cool writer if he learns from the things that I think are kind of problematic in this book. And I'm gonna be straight up, I probably wouldn't recommend this book to people. Did I hate this book? No, not at all. But I do have some problems with it, and because of those problems, I don't think I could recommend this to people. Let's get into why these are the thoughts that I think. This novella is following 3 cops, with our protagonist being our main cop, Clint. Her husband, Samuel, also a cop, and then their weird, wacky, zany, troublemaker Sherlock analog, Chapman. They're cops in a country that is a theocracy, but this is just God in charge. Anyway, these cops are the hand of God, administering some pretty punitive justice. And while they think that they're out there just spreading God's love or whatever, the military arm of this government is even higher above the police. And they're kind of just running amok doing whatever they want because they aren't affected by the hand of God, because they're the other hand of God, or probably, I don't know. There's more books, who knows? This is a setting that is right on the edge of the Industrial Revolution, and there also might be some magic in it. We didn't really see a ton of it, but I think he talked about that at some point, so there might be magic later. Not a lot of magic. I'd call it fantasy light. That's the world. Those are the characters. What actually happens? This book opens up on a crime scene, and a pretty gruesome one at that. The murder of a whole family. But it's in the description of these gruesome murders that you really get a feel for one of the key inspirations for this story. And that's the first thing that I wanted to talk about for Daniel Greene being a new writer. He doesn't have his writing voice really hammered out yet. This is more of a collage of inspirations put together. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. He's a new writer, so he's going to have to go through his inspirations to find his voice. Because of this collage of inspirations, you get a ton of Stephen King-inspired narration and description here. We hang on some honestly disgusting things, and he really holds your eyes on them for a long time. And after there's a tussle in a wine cellar, there's some description in there that could come right out of a Stephen King story that really makes you want to take a shower after reading it. I think that the characters were, for the most part, pretty enjoyable to follow. Clint and Samuel were certainly a power couple that felt enjoyable to watch how they interacted with each other. They were just fun to experience. With a few weak points, I don't know, there were a few interactions between the two of them where I felt like I thought I understood how their relationship worked for the most part, and then because of the way that I thought their relationship was, these few interactions that they had kind of felt more like story plot requirements to get them to where they needed to be instead of actual depth of their relationship. And Chapman was fine. I don't know. I didn't find him super enjoyable nor very interesting. He's certainly a gruffer Sherlock. He doesn't have all of the intelligence of Sherlock, but man, he can pick apart a crime scene. But he just didn't really captivate me whatsoever. And even if a character is meant to be unlikable, I feel like they still have to be somewhat interesting in some way for you to want to read about them. And I know there's only so many pages in a novella, so like maybe he could have been fleshed out a bit more in a longer story, but that just didn't happen here. The writing itself does a really good job of not sticking out when you're reading, which I think for this style of straightforward narration is actually pretty skillful. However, there are a few lines here and there that stick out and make me notice them, and I still haven't forgotten about those lines, which is not a good sign. They were few and far between, and so for a new writer, that's pretty good, but they still stick out a lot, and that's not. The pacing is probably one of the biggest failures of this book. For being about 140 pages, not a lot happens. The middle portion of the story is fairly awkward. It feels like just a whole bunch of mechanisms and cogs turning to get to the final bit, and a lot of it's really convoluted and unnecessary. We hang around other scenes for what feels like far too long. The opening crime scene is a big chunk of this story, and so that all happening so slowly, and then every other scene happening very quick, kind of throws the pacing out of whack here, especially when we're talking about the next issue that I have with this story, and that's, it promised me a mystery, and then it didn't give me a mystery. Maybe there's some bigger arcing mystery over all 3 novellas, but I thought we were gonna have a mystery here of why they got killed, what was going on, and we get some answers, but not other answers, and no matter what, we, the reader, don't get any of those things dropped in as hints for us. We spend so much time at this crime scene, and I'm expecting, as a reader, oh, crime scene, mystery, cops, we got a crime to solve. Let's kind of connect some dots here. But none of the tools that were given in that initial setup matter going forward. Nothing. And that's just a shame. I feel like a lot of this might have been a hesitancy as a new writer, that he needs to hold the reader's hand because they couldn't figure this out and it'll feel bad, so he just has to go through with them. The problem is it just ends up worse for it. I was really hyped for the mystery that I wasn't given. Ultimately, I would not recommend this book if any of the things that I complained about you wouldn't like. If you're interested in the premise of what Daniel Greene is trying to build here, or maybe some industrial revolution setting fantasy that might be coming out of this, it's something that could definitely grow with Daniel's experience. But I gotta give this like 2 rounds out of 6 in my 6 shooter. Now, let's talk spoilers. I'll start with some of the light issues, some of the smaller things that I had problems with here, and then we'll dive deeper. Big example of a time where I was pulled out of the writing that I had talked about earlier is when Clid has this really weird thing for the first chapter. It's like a weird personality trait for her where she's such a heavy smoker that she doesn't realize when she lights cigarettes. It's mentioned like 2 or 3 times, not a couple paragraphs apart, and then it's not really touched on for the rest of the story. Maybe it's mentioned, I think maybe it's slipped in a bit smoother in later chapters, but for this to be an intro chapter and him being a new writer, these things are going to stick out when you're really excited about this. Ooh, I got a cool character trait I want to get across, and it just kind of comes off as something that should have hit the cutting room floor. I'm gonna be honest with you. Not just from like a, oh, this is like a weird thing to read about perspective, but it's also just a weird tonal thing. You have this, oh, it's kind of funny, she burns herself when she doesn't realize she's lighting these cigarettes, ha ha ha, she smokes a lot of cigarettes, and that's kind of comedically stupid in this serious story where there's like a lot of gruesome murder and a lot of these other conspiracy things, and I don't think that those tonal things mesh well, especially in the first chapter of the story where you're really trying to set up the tone. And it's hardly a good indicator that she smokes a lot, because that's just not something that people that smoke a lot do. At least I should say, hi, I know a lot of people, perhaps some of them fall into the demographic of occasionally partaking in the smoky jokies, and this is unheard of to me. So yeah, small things like that, they stick out as things that only a new writer would choose to keep in past editing. My other big minor nitpick issue, I don't know, based on my understanding, there's gonna be more novellas before we get to the bigger grand book series that this is building up to, and so these novellas are following a plot line, but there's nothing to follow at the end of this book. Everyone's dead. Like, yeah, there's a mystery, I guess, of what is the government doing here or whatever, and who is that superpowered guy, but I don't care about those 2 questions, unfortunately, mainly because, and we're about to right into 100% my opinion only land. Maybe those things are interesting to you and you want to keep reading, and that's all you need. You don't need characters or stakes, and that's fine, but you can't kill everyone. Not for me. I need something to keep me going forward. I need someone for these terrible things to affect and for me to care about them, because they're going to affect my character that I care about. If you want to have fun as a writer and have an occasional murder, that's fine. Give me someone else to care about, though. The world's fine enough, you know? I haven't read a lot of industrial revolution fantasy. We get some hints at what magic might look like, so that's kind of cool. But there's no cast for me to like. There's no cast for me to be excited for. So why am I going to be excited about the future plot lines of this story? And ooh, we even get baited into a very interesting plot line that gets thrown away immediately at the end of this story in 10 sentences. We get this blink where Clid's like, oh man, I'm gonna join the rebels. And oh, that's really interesting because we're gonna see pushback against these cop ideals that she had, because clearly she's been kind of brainwashed by the police to think that she's the best force on earth, but actually they're kind of causing a lot of systemic problems maybe, and then the rebels can like showcase this to her and she'll grow as a kid. Nope, she died. She just gets killed at the end of the story because it's got to be. Daniel Greene even talks about in interviews. He doesn't think this is grimdark. I don't know why you just decided that the tone of this story is everyone's got to die then. When in interviews you say there's a positivity on the other side of this that makes this not necessarily grimdark, and then the story ends with everyone getting killed, I don't understand what you're talking about. Anyways, you know, if you want a story to have a plot line that continues on and you give me no continual characters, you lose a lot of my retention. Maybe that's just me. You know, I feel like readers like characters a lot, and taking them away might make them not like your story. Now, I want to address the major spoilery, maybe it's not tone, but I guess it's kind of tone. But in a vacuum, and right now there's no other books out, so this is the vacuum, this one book. It's a propaganda piece. It's very clearly a piece that is super pro-cop, even if Daniel Greene didn't mean to write it that way. And I really want to talk about why you can be not pro-cop and still accidentally write a propaganda piece. I'm not one for authorial intent. You put a piece of media out there, it's now on the readers to get what they're interpreting out of it. They can find things that you didn't mean to put in, they can find things that you very purposefully meant to put in, but it's on the reader's interpretation now. You've created the work, and you can say all what it's about and what it's not, but it's on the reader and what they're able to get out of this story. We follow 3 cops in the Capitol Police, literal officers of God as they're going about their normal cop duties. And we get lines like, since their founding, the Capitol Police had been a force for good in the community. Those who had been among the first to join were all heralded as local heroes. Okay, not so bad. Cops are looked up to. That's not the worst possible thing. This is a fantasy universe. In a pinch, police could usually count on the help from armed bystanders. Alright. A cop allowing a private citizen to assist in handling their job. You could see some kind of weird mob justice being promoted here. Maybe even some keeping minority opinions, even if they might be the ethically correct opinions, down by scaring them with the way that private citizens can act against them in assistance to the government-funded police departments. Kind of some weird ideas going on there. Disobeying an officer of God during a raid was punishable by death. Clyd pulled her trigger. Okay, well that's just straight up murder by a police officer. But it's okay, cause she's a cop and she's gotta dispense justice, duh. I get it. I get what Daniel Greene wants to say. This book is narrated by a cop. It's going to be slanted towards being propaganda because of that inherently. Yeah, that's fine. But we never see pushback in this world against these ideas. If you want a character or you want to express things that you don't agree with, you should probably show us any amount of pushback, any amount of, hey, is what I'm doing right? Or, hey, what you're doing is not right. We are meant to like Clyd in this story. She's meant to be a character that we see at the beginning, and you know, I'm kind of vibing with her morals. She's trying to do good in this world. She truly believes in the justice that she's giving out as a police officer, but she also notices that some of the things that aren't super up to snuff. And as we follow her, that slowly dissolves away into, nah, she's just another cop. There's a scene later on in the story where she acts knowingly out of line of what she should do as a police officer and straight up murders a doctor who might have done some pseudoscience-y surgery on her ex-friend. And maybe I'm crazy, but the way this scene reads is we're supposed to be cheering her on killing this person. We're supposed to think she's right for doing it because what that doctor did was evil, so she deserves to have evil done to her. We don't get any questioning internal moral systems from Clyd after she kills this person because Clyd thinks she did the right thing. It's just unwavering decision by the protagonist, boom, move on to the next thing. Now, of course, a protagonist can have some sus thoughts here and there, some upsetting opinions or actions for what we might see as okay. Is that what the author is saying is okay? No, I don't think that those two things have to line up. But I do think we have to have something in the book to push against this, even if it's Clyd's own moral compass going, wait a minute, maybe this isn't okay, or if it's some external force that this isn't okay, like sending Clyd to the rebels maybe would have been something that would have been that external force. But none of that happens. This entire time, we're just supposed to be cheering for Clyd doing her job, fighting back against the corruption of the military who's just choosing to murder people, which is wrong. And then she kills a doctor who was not a threat to her, which is right. I don't think I need to point out that this is kind of conflicting in her thought process. It's clearly stating to the reader, military bad because they're doing bad things, but cop good because they're doing bad things for the right reasons. I don't think that reading into this to say Daniel Greene is a big advocate for police abuse. But I certainly think that this was quite tone deaf. And he's been writing this for a pretty short time, and it only came out in March. He could have either held this off or give it some more thought, but he didn't. And that's more the problem that I have here, is the tone deafness that occurred. He's addressed this, so I'm not trying to harp on it. I just really do think that there's a good argument that people are giving, and Daniel Greene isn't really listening sometimes to this. Some people might just be saying, ooh, cop bad, and you know, there's a nuanced argument there, and I think that nuanced argument is, if you look into the themes and the story here, is that cops can do bad things when they believe that there are going to be good outcomes from them, and that's not a good message to have be unquestioned in your story for your audience. I gotta break it to you. I watch a lot of cop media. Buddy cop shows, you found my weakness. Give me a psychic and a cop, or an author and a cop, or the devil and a cop, and I'm gonna watch that. I love watching media that I believe lives in a world where cops genuinely do the good thing, where cops are genuinely making changes in the world that are positive. It's like some kind of escapism from the horrors of this real world. And even in those, they are doing blatantly bad things sometimes, skirting the law to do what's good, breaking laws to put away who you think is the bad guy, pushing ideas that it's okay to be above the law sometimes if you ultimately do the right thing. And that's how you end up with a lot of the abuse that you see. That's how you repeat these problems where you can violate people's rights for no reason other than you think you're doing the right thing. A lot of that media deserves pushback, and Breach of Peace is not free from that pushback. Like I said, I don't hate this book. I think there are a lot of problems with it, but I think a lot of them can be solved with Daniel Greene just growing as a writer. I do think that this tonal issue with only showing cops thinking they're right and setting up that we're supposed to be following these characters as positives is the biggest flaw that he needs to consciously work on, and won't just come with becoming a better writer. So obviously, I'm probably gonna be checking out other Daniel Greene books when they come out, but would I recommend this? Not really. Did you agree with the things I had to say here? Did you disagree with some of my points? I really want to hear what you got to say, because these are just my thoughts after reading this story and reading all of the discourse that took place on Twitter and seeing some of Daniel Greene's own content about it. I've just been kind of having it jumble up as a soup in my brain, and this was kind of my way of getting my thoughts out there about this and why a lot of these things kind of irked me the way they did. And if you agree with those things or disagree, let me know down in the comments below. And while you're down there, hit that thumbs up button. And if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button, why don't you? Thank you so much for checking this video out, checking out any of my videos, subscribing, doing any of the things. It really means a lot. I'll catch you in the next video. And until then, stay lit.